Namaskara. Hearty welcome to Jnanarjane Empowering Excellence. Friends, today's Wednesday study circle, we have very interesting topic, GST, Goods and Service Tax on Special Transactions in Real Estate. A very top, dynamic topic or ever interesting or ever changing topic, I can say. In GST, real estate is an important sector. So to enlighten us on this topic, we have again an eminent chartered accountant, a specialist in indirect tax, CA Ravi Kumar Enamandra is with us. On behalf of Bangalore branch and on behalf of all the participants here, hearty welcome to CA Ravi Kumar. Hearty welcome, Ravi Kumar.
Thank you very much, sir.
Friends, you are the reason for this Wednesday study circle. Your continuous support and encouragement for all our Bangalore branch program is made us to organize this week after week. So hearty welcome to each one of you. Happy learning. Friends, I'll take a minute of yours to update you about our upcoming programs. On this Saturday, 13th November, we have arranged one Train the Trainer program of ICAI's brand building program as such. It is a tax and financial literacy for the general public. Vittiya Jnan ICAI ka Abhiyan is the slogan. Vittiya Jnan ICAI ka Abhiyan, tax and financial literacy for the general public. Tax and financial literacy drive of ICAI. That program I am conducting on Saturday, 13th November, evening 4 to 7 p.m. It is a virtual program. And in that, there are 5-6 topics we are covering: succession planning, digital payments, to handle financial crisis, and like that, 3 more topics interesting to general public we are covering. The idea behind of this ICAI program is to create awareness about ICAI and its members, to differentiate a chartered accountant from the general sales tax practitioner or other financial advisor. We have to demonstrate our strength, our understanding of all these various law. It is not necessary the topics which we are covering on 13th. There are many other areas also we can tell to general public in the various forums, maybe industrial associations, lions, rotaries, or in a large apartment complex where number of residents are or the general public are available. They may be interested to know about the succession planning, about investment opportunities, about retirement planning, about credit card utilities, about how to face the financial crisis, how to make savings, or various topics, maybe TDS. Many people having difficulty in understanding the TDS on immovable property. When you purchase more than 50 lakhs, you have to deduct TDS. Why and how? Okay, so even if you are selling the government acquiring property, they deduct tax. You are making payment more than 10 lakhs, which is not allowed. These are all. There are various issues the general public have confusion in GST. Other day, someone was telling if you make purchases more than 1,000 from a supermarket, big basket, or big bazaar, they charge GST. So you reduce the bill more less than 1,000. This is what the news spreads in the WhatsApp. So there are so many confusions people having in GST, in income tax, in TDS, in various other issues. As a chartered accountants, people not aware what we can do, how we can add value to the general public or the stakeholders, or in that matter, just to explain how one can read a balance sheet, what general public or the stakeholders can expect it from an audited balance sheet. They think once we audited, it is 100% foolproof. That is the general understanding or the general expectation in the market. Instead of that, what exactly is there, what they can expect from an audited balance sheet. So all various issues, so which you can go and talk to the general public. For that, your branch, your area, whichever area you are belong to, if you are in Bangalore, Bangalore branch will support all the logistics. We provide a banner. We provide any other logistics is required. A presentation also we can give. We can arrange a speaker if you are not comfortable to speak. Identify a place where large number of people gather and ready to listen to us with respect. Then our member can come and talk. If they have to provide all other facilities like a projector and a place, a decent place should be there. We cannot talk in a general market or any other. If it is apartment complex, normally they have a big auditorium. In such places we can conduct. If it is a Lions Club in a hotel, in a decent hotel and all, we can go and talk. Our people come and talk. So it is not a general talk, it is a specialized requirement. Based on their requirement, our members will come and talk to the make the general public understand who a chartered accountant is, what is their knowledge, what exactly they can, how they can add value to the general public or to the industry or to any client or to any company. This is the brand building initiative. When our ICA brand builds, indirectly all the members benefit. That is the idea behind this drive of ICI. Bangalore branch is conducting a train the trainer program. After that, you have to identify the place and branch will support in logistic. With that note, so please register, please spread this message of 13th November program. Register yourself and join that program. After that, on 26th and 27th, we have 2 days conference on charitable trust and societies covering various aspects of income tax, GST, FCRA, and other various issues or statutes connected relevant to the charitable trusts and other institutions. It's a 2 days conference. Speakers from across India, eminent speakers are going to enlighten us on the topic. It is under the Professional Development Committee of ICI. We are conducting this program. So it is an excellent program of 2 days. You can understand lot of opportunities in NGO practice. Friends, code of governance is also one of the topic we are speaking. The expectation from the government is changing from the NGO. Every transaction of NGO is accounted now by the government. Government will come to know because so many things you need to upload. Whether if you are collecting money from CSR, you need to upload a form, you need to give all the details. If you are collecting any donation, you need to upload. So it will go to credit in 26 years of for the donor. So many things are happening. Friends, let us understand, it's a great opportunity. Lakhs of NGOs are not complying anything. Chartered accountants have a good opportunity to educate them and make them compliant. At the same time, you can grow your practice. Friends, people are telling we don't get enough work. These are all the areas we identified. We are conducting programs. Please attend those programs. Learn, educate yourself. In return, you can make a lucrative practice. With that note, so please register 26, 27. Please visit bangaloreici.org for that program. Again, on indirect tax, national conference is planned on 10th and 11th of December. It's a 2 days conference, 10th and 11th of December on indirect tax, national conference. I request all of you to register that program. And one more important program is going to happen on 19th and 20th of this month. This is SARC conference in Coimbatore. It is again a hybrid mode, both available. You can sit in Bangalore and attend that program through virtually, or you can visit Coimbatore and sit in a Le Meridian hotel and enjoy that conference. Please register for that program. It is going to happen on 19th and 20th of this month. SARC conference, very interesting conference every year happening across South India and across India. Speakers are available. Very interesting conference. This year SARC chairman made it a wonderful program for all of us. Please register for that program. With that note, once again, hearty welcome to each one of you for today's program. Last but most important point is CABF. Bangalore branch created a link for CABF contribution. I am sure all of you aware of Chartered Accountants Benevolent Fund. Friend, this is the only fund available for the benefit of chartered accountant and to his family members when they are in financial distress. So this year and last year, because of COVID, so many claims came in, and happily our CABF fund given money or given support to various chartered accountant and to their family members when they are in distress. So this year, the plan is to spend from the interest. However, since last 2 years, CABF is spending money from the corpus. So it is our responsibility to refill those corpus. Friends, ICI Bangalore branch created a link to contribute for this CABF. 10,000 is the life membership contribution. I request maximum number to come and contribute for that noble cause. With that note, once again, hearty welcome to each one of you. Over to Divya. Divya, are you there?
Chairman,
Please.
I'm there, sir. I'm there. Very good evening to all the participants of today's program and to our speaker of today's program. Dear members, today we have with us speaker Mr. Ravi Kumar to present on today's topic. To give a brief introduction about him, he is a chartered accountant. Post qualification, he has more than 18 years of experience in indirect taxes. Currently is working in EY Bangalore as Director Indirect Taxes, handling clients on indirect tax matters. His work experience includes working with the Deloitte and PwC as well. He has authored articles on topical indirect tax matters and he's been speaker at various events conducted by ICN and many other institutes. With this very brief introduction, I wholeheartedly welcome to you for today's program, sir. Hearty welcome to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Divya. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shetty sir, for choosing me as one of the speakers for this event. In fact, for the Bangalore branch CH community, good evening to all of you. And this is the first of the event which I'm participating in Bangalore because I was actually a part of the Bombay Western region actually for about 15 years and recently moved to Bangalore. So for me, it's the first time I'm attending the audience, speaking to the people in Bangalore branch. So with this small introduction which Divya gave and on a topic which is of most relevance for professionals across the community, in fact, whether dealing in direct tax or whether audit, real estate is something which obviously throws lots of challenges. And myself being a chartered accountant, who has practiced in the area of indirect tax, I thought this is worthwhile to spend a couple of hours, although I still feel that couple of hours is too small for for us to actually understand more about this industry and the special transactions. But I wanted to make an attempt to give a flavor of what exactly the transactions in real estate are and what exactly are the things which are being looked after by the department, how exactly the department is looking at various transactions. I don't want to use the word suspicion here, but being a real estate, it always comes with an added element of I would say a bit of confusion and a bit of interpretative issues do crop in at various places. And this was the way in which even the pre-GST era was there when service tax and VAT were there. So I take this opportunity to just present to you and let me share my screen, the presentation once. Is my screen visible, sir?
Yeah, it is visible.
Yeah. So the way in which I have actually designed my presentation is actually giving a brief about the transactions in the real estate from a GST perspective. And then probably we will go into these special transactions a bit into the specifics of each of the transactions specific to the real estate area. I'm switching off my video for a minute. So as you all know, GST is a destination-based consumption tax which is applicable on supply of goods and services, or both. So this is just a generic slide on GST. Why I'm actually covering this is in the context of real estate is to say that we deal with something which is of an immobile property which does not specifically find place in the definition of good or service until we go deep into the deeming fiction and also the definition of services, etc. There are certain exceptions like alcoholic liquor, 5 petroleum products. These are all normally known. CGST, SGST, and IGST it is there. But when we actually move to the term supply, which is the basic premise or basic taxable event which actually needs to be there for taxing any of the transaction, if there has to be a supply. Now, if we see the kind of definition which is provided, it does not only cover goods and services for consideration, but supplies mentioned even for without consideration also are specific covered in specific transactions are also subjected to GST. Now, one of the things which actually the GST has promised at the time of introduction and is continuing also is that entire supply chain would be subject to GST, though levied by central and state government. And at each point of time, whatever is the GST paid at the time of procurement or level before is available as a credit. And this is the basic premise on which actually our entire GST is structured. Now, what happened after that is something which we will see specifically in the real estate. But I just thought, let me put those basic aspects clear before we move on to the real estate. Now, moving on to the GST on the real estate, if we see, works contract is an area like everybody knows in the service tax era and in the and also from a VAT perspective. Works contract is always a typical contract which has elements of supply of goods and also supply of services. Now, works contract always has these various methods to value, and the concept of works contract has been brought into the GST as well, because we are talking about supply of goods and services on which GST has to be paid. Now, there is a definition of a works contract which is given in the GST Act, which includes construction, fabrication, completion, erection, installation, fitting out, all of these specifically in relation to any immobile property. Now, why I'm specifying this here is that while in VAT and service tax, even these activities done for mobile properties, like say, for example, an AMC or a maintenance contract, and even in respect of mobile properties are covered as works contract. The GST legislation has made it exclusively for immobile property only, the transactions which are subject are part of the works contract. Now, there are two specific things which are there, where ownership does not get transferred. That is a pure works contract, which is like a construction contract, which is given. There is an 18% or 12%, which is in specific cases with ITC availability. So here exactly, if you see, the concept of flow of credit from one level to the other comes. But where ownership of land gets transferred to the developer, 1/3 land deduction. So we will see about this 1/3 land deduction. But as a basic understanding of this transaction, if you are actually constructing a property which is an immobile property and transferring the title along with the ownership of land or an undivided interest, then that works contract is something which is specifically covered in all these real estate transactions and subject to GST. So one specific entry, if you see the down part, like entry 5B of Schedule 2, specifically says construction of a complex building, civil structure or a part, which is to be treated as supply of service. So every time this will be treated as a supply of service. So this is the deeming fiction which is there. And the main condition for taxing this transaction is that consideration should be received before issuance of completion. Some part of the consideration should be received before the issuance of completion certificate or first occupation, whichever is earlier. So if the consideration is completely paid after the issuance of the completion certificate or first occupation, then that transaction is typically regarded as a sale of buildings or a sale of constructed property on which there is no GST per se. Also, there is one specific entry. All of this I will use it in my subsequent discussions. That's why I'm just setting the context here. So sale of land. So specifically, if you see that sale of land is something which is neither to be treated as a supply of goods nor a service, and also sale of building, which is what we discussed just a while before. The same thing is also not regarded as a supply of goods or as a supply of service. So this is the broad contours or the broad structure of the GST, specifically as regards the real estate transactions. Now, moving further into specific aspects of the real estate construction, there are various kinds of projects. So if you see this slide, I have divided into two parts. One, new projects which are post 1st April 19, which is 2019. There was a basic shift in the way the taxation system is structured. And there are also certain ongoing projects which are prior to 1st April, but opted to be continued under the old rate. So technically, when there is something which has been already in ongoing project, a leeway has been given by the government to opt for the old system itself. So if you see this structure, first, when we talk of commercial projects, they have not tinkered with anything. Either if it is an ongoing project or a new project, the rate is 12. So that is how I was actually talking. That is, this is effective 1/3 land deduction. That is how the industry also looks at the rate of tax. Now, when we are actually moving to the residential project, you will see the difference that affordable and non-affordable. Like there are two different things which are there. This is the value of the flats, and where if there is an ongoing project where the ITC, which is input tax credit, the rate was actually 8 on 12, which has got reduced to 1 and 5, but ITC is blocked. Why I'm talking this specifically here is the fundamental shift while introduction of GST, which the government has attempted while fixing these rates, that is without giving ITC while fixing the rates. This is the second of the sectors where government has taken this move, first being the restaurant sector. While the benefit of GST is generally seen only when there is a free flow of credit which is there across the supply chain, many of the real estate players have actually told that because of the absence of an inverted duty structure, like the refund of inverted duty structure, there is a huge credits which are being piled up, and there is a huge working capital cost. I think there were innumerable representations which have gone to the department to reduce the rates, and some have even suggested to go to this option of without ITC, so that the system is much more clear and easily understandable to the common public as well. So they have come out with this option of 1 and 5 without ITC, and where there is an ongoing project. In fact, the first version when it came around March 15th of 2019 does not even provide a leeway for the ongoing. I think then the entire industry wake up quickly, and then so that if they have to write off the entire input tax credit within a span of 15 days and moving to a new structure, that will be the industry will be in a doldrums. And then they have approached the ministry and then requested them to consider a transitionary provision for the ongoing projects. That's so when the government also has accepted the request and come out with an option for the ongoing projects, where if there is an ongoing project, the developer has the option to choose 8 or 12, depending upon affordable or non-affordable, but still take the ITC benefit. Now, one of the questions which you, as in your area of practice, many of the people would have actually got these questions specifically saying that why somebody is actually charging me 12 when the government has prescribed 5, and many developers have got the queries saying that customers are asking me to charge 5 and not 12, so 7% is actually pocketed. So I just want to make it very clear that the option is always, or was always, with the developer, and it is not for the customer, it is for the developer, and the developer could have chosen with ITC or without ITC in 2019. It was a window given for one month only, within which the developer had to choose, and he might have chosen this option of going with ITC or without ITC. I think the kind of advertisements which actually the government has placed in the public and social media, saying that the rates were reduced to 1 and 5, created a chaotic situation. Although now people got to know the difference between what 1 and 5 and 8 and 12 were always mean. But still, being in this industry, advising the clients specifically on this sector, I still get queries from our clients, specifically on the customers raising this issue. I think this is one area where you need to be very clear when a customer, when a client of yours asks, is there a leeway or how to address this situation? Very clearly, being a professional, while we do empathize with the customer of to pay that extra, but he has to also be able to appreciate the fact that the price is considered after taking ITC into consideration. So if I have moved into 1 or 5, the base rate would have gone up because of no ITC. So I think those calculations would be very difficult to just explain to the normal public. But as a professional, if we have to give our advice, we need to be very clear that option was always with the developer, and the option was never with the customer to pay which rate he wants to pay. So this is one differentiation which happened in 2019. In 2019, when they have fixed up these rates, they have also come up with 2 different concepts called RREP and REP. RREP means a residential real estate project where the commercial portion is less than 15% of the total area. So what they have told is that in case of RREP, it is actually that 5% without ITC is the rate. Affordable and non-affordable continues with 1 and 5, and ongoing projects will go with 12, 18, 40, 12. But if it is a REP where the commercial is more than 15, then proportionate ITC with respect to commercial only you will get, and rate will continue to be 12, 12 and 5 actually. Sorry, it was non-affordable is 5. So this continues as 12, 8 and 12 for ongoing projects. But one thing which we need to clearly take into consideration is proportionate ITC will be available only with respect to commercial. But for affordable and non-affordable residential, which are 1 and 5, let me correct this presentation once. 1 and 5, the proportionate ITC won't be available. So this is the broad structure or the rate structure which we call for real estate projects, which is currently applicable. One important feature which we need to understand here while framing this entire rate structure or the 1/3 land deduction which the government has given is that there is no separate treatment given for the land based on the area where the project is located. Earlier, people used to actually get a higher land deduction. If, say, for example, people living in Bombay used to get a higher land deduction because of the way the land prices are. But now with GST being a one nation, one tax, and they are telling that there should not be any differentiation between a project in Bombay or a project in Sikkim, if I have to say, just for the sake of comparison. Both have a 1/3 land deduction. Although this appears to be an aberration, but GST being one nation, one tax, they have actually moved to a system that 1/3 land deduction is something which clearly comes out to for developers across the country, and there is no option given for the developer whatsoever, irrespective of his location, whether he located in the prime part of the metro or he with a suburb or a village or any other rural area. So technically everybody is treated on par as far as the GST regulations are concerned. So this is a typical rate structure or the tax structure which is there. probably in about a couple of years from now, assuming the project life cycle is generally around 4 to 5 years for a mid-sized project. I'm not talking of the two big gated communities, which could take even more. Probably by around 2023 or 2024, we may actually be left with that one option of 1 or 5 without ITC for all the residential, because ongoing projects, assuming, will be completed by now. And then some of these issues which are there currently prevalent now, maybe may be ending at that point of time, and we may move to a much simpler regime. But sitting in 2021 and for the coming 1-2 years, we need to actually grapple with multiple rates and multiple schemes which are there, and understand these nuances better, specifically with those developers having projects across these ongoing and new projects within the same entity. If the projects are housed under different entities, that's a much simpler situation. But in some of these big developers, what obviously happens is that considering the name and way in which the RERA approvals come, they usually have the projects in one entity, the bigger projects. So in those entities where there are new projects and ongoing projects, the complications of rates obviously are much higher as compared to the entities which have only projects either under new or under ongoing. So there is not much of a worry too much about ITC segregation or ITC reversal. All of these aspects would not come into picture generally. So this is the broad structure of the GST structure on real estate. Now let me move further. So let me take one by one what are the issues which I would like to cover. I have noted some 10-12 special points which I wanted to cover within the allocated time. And I'm happy to take any other issues, either if we have time today, or I will give my contact number, which is available with the branch, and I will also share on this chat as well. You can contact me. The first of the issues is whether GST rates subject to the conditions can be prescribed in the notification in absence of a power under levy or under levy section, which is 9(1). So technically, if you see the way the wordings of this GST Act are there, but there can be a challenge. Like say, for example, there is no power which is given to the government to put a rate subject to certain conditions. What I mean is that if you see this section which provides for the levy of GST, it only says you have to prescribe a rate. Technically, what that means is that it can be either be like the nil rated, which is exempted, or 5%, 12%, 18, 28. These are the rate schedules which are prescribed. So you can actually provide any supply to be covered within those brackets or the schedules which are given. But what the government has done now with the new projects is that they have gone ahead and said that I am notifying a rate which is like 7.5, and there is a 1/3 deduction which works out to 5, or there is a 12 and 1/3 deduction which works out to 8. Or 5 and 1.5, which is 1% or 5%. But what is happening is ITC is restricted. Now, I think what we can see in the coming days, there is a detailed discussions which are happening across real estate players as to why we should be subjected to a specific provision when the law itself does not provide. So technically, one can argue that the provision by which these notified rates are there, where the ITC is restricted, is subject to a bit of challenge, I would say. And a good interpretative approach has to be taken. And if somebody is interested to pursue this, because what is happening is the ITC is a huge component in the real estate, and if you are actually not giving that option to the customer, the developer, then he's losing a very high amount of expense cost, which is actually not added to the cost of the flat. That is also not worth from a customer point of view. So one of the things which off late, probably 2 years down the line, because of 2019, the rates being prescribed, people have started examining these rates in much more detail. And I think one of these recent discussions is mainly on whether this 5 or 1 has to be followed sacrosanct, or whether there is an option. And one way we are actually seeing is that there is a way that we can challenge this. We want to see how exactly this interpretation goes, and if somebody files a writ petition, whether they want to amend the act and then provide for this is something which time will tell in future. This is one aspect. The second one, what they are telling is that there is a shortfall tax. So what they are telling in shortfall tax is, when you are opting for this new project, the URD purchases, which is like the purchases from unregistered dealers, cannot be, there has to be 80% procurements from registered dealer, and you can't have more than 20%. So that is 80%. If there is a violation, then you have to actually go and pay that additional tax. Now, if you see the way in which the RCM section is worded, it only prescribes a specific person or a specific goods and services which are subjected to RCM. Now, what is happening with the real estate is that it is not linked to any person or any good. Just because you are opting for a new product, project now, and there is a shortfall of certain percentage of procurements from registered parties, there is a reversal which is getting triggered. Now, is this also worth the test of section 9, which section 9(4), which prescribes the RCM? I think this is also something which is an interesting area. Can government impose a tax like a shortfall tax, which is not directly provided in the law for specific things like the reverse charge mechanism? Now, whether the condition restricting the availment in case constitutionally valid, this is also one more option or one more things which we need to give, that as per Article 14 of the Constitution, the state shall not deny to any person equality before the law or equal protection of laws within the territory. So such mandatory condition is violative is one argument which we can take. And in case of passenger transportation, GTA, there is an option to given to make payment of tax with ITC, like the rent-a-cab or the GTA. There are two rates which are prescribed. Either you choose a rate with tax, with input tax credit, or you choose a option without credit and follow a lesser rate. But the option is always available with the service provider or the supplier. Now, in the case of the real estate, the peculiarity is that there is no option. They are actually making it mandatory that he is not entitled to credit, and he is actually required to follow the option of no credit and follow the lower rate of tax. So in a way, are you restricting the fundamental right of equality is something which requires a deeper consideration, is what I would just like to place before this audience. And if there are good developers who want to contest these new rates of tax and the no restrictions of no credit, I think there is enough meat and material available to challenge it. Although we have to be very clear outcomes which the government can still resort to, like a retrospective amendments or something of that sort. But as of now, if you see the way in which these provisions are there, there is an area of doubt or an area of interpretation which can be taken up to a court of law and then try and succeed if at all there are certain interested developers who want to pursue this matter, is what I would say. Now, moving on further, deduction for the land value. This is what I was actually talking a bit earlier also. Like construction of immovable property services, if it is provided along with transfer of undivided share of land, deduction of 1/3 value is provided for the purpose of valuation. When there is availability of actual land value, is 1/3 available, 1/3 abatement mandatory, or can it be challenged? Now, what is happening? Like I was actually giving this comparison between Mumbai and Sikkim. I think that's the highest degree of comparison I can make. But whether the land value is same across these territories across India, the answer is an obvious no. Any prudent practical person would clearly understand the rate differences, and professionals like us also appreciate the fact that. You can't equate the land at different places. But is there a way in which can I go ahead and challenge this? Now, what is happening is that you specifically don't have any option which is left out, and the way in which these legal provisions are worded, there is a payment of GST with only 1/3 results in payment of excess, but trying to fix a land value leads to taxation of land under GST, which is unconstitutional. Now, can I go ahead and say that actual value of land shall be deducted instead of deemed deduction? The answer, if we read the provisions of the notification, clearly says no, because the value has to be arrived at after considering a deduction of 1/3. So there is no option given while defining the value that is liable to GST in case of these under construction flats. Even this was challenged with the advanced rulings, and also the appellate advanced ruling is given in case of Karma Buildcon, saying that it has to be mandatorily determined, and actual land value, even if the same is clearly ascertainable, cannot be adopted. So if you actually go to the authorities with this argument, I think that is something which probably may not be as successful as the other argument of 1 or 5 with ITC, without ITC, which were discussed earlier. So what I was trying to emphasize here is that specifically for players in Karnataka, where earlier the practice is that have two agreements, where one is for land value and one is for the construction. I don't think there is a option available now to go ahead and succeed before the court of law and say that I want a deduction of the actual value of land, specifically when the language clearly says that the deemed deduction of 1/3 value has to be taken, irrespective of whether the actual value of land is there or not. So to this extent, the provisions in the notifications have been clearly given, and there is specifically no option left with the developers. I think that is something which we have to be wary of. Why I'm also telling about this point, although after 4 years, still I'm telling, I have been receiving these queries, not regularly though, but there are people who are actually going to advanced rulings and then asking these questions. Make me wonder that is there a window which is available? For me, the answer which has come is that there is clearly no way you can go ahead and ask for these kind of deductions. And I just thought, considering the practices in the Karnataka state, it is worthwhile I actually emphasize this point during this seminar. Now, one more new concept which is coming up is developed plots. So technically, what a developed plot is always is that you are actually getting only land, but that is developed in such a way that there are certain amenities, like say, for example, there is a common road, there is a water treatment plant, effluent treatment plant, power connection. All of that is developed with, it's like a residential colony layout. Actually, the lands are given with all the facilities. Now, what is happening here? I think many players are actually venturing into this, considering the huge plots of land which they have, and with a minimal construction value compared to the bigger gated communities, is that they are venturing into these developed plots. Now, what the practices we have been seeing are, I think I would say 2 or 3 models which they are actually doing. Mainly what they are telling is that since I'm only selling the land, I don't want to charge GST because this comes as sale of land. Seems to be an aggressive standpoint, even otherwise, because I merely am not selling land only. What I'm selling in case of a developed plot is that I'm selling land with associated facilities. Now, should that mean that I will only get 1/3 value of land, or as in case of construction of complex? That is what actually one of these Gujarat AR has taken a counter view. They are telling that where sale price includes the cost of land as well as cost of common amenities, the supply will be covered as construction. So this seems to be the other end of the spectrum. So I would say that treating only 1/3 value, even in case of developed plots, is something which is a far-fetched interpretation and needs judicial consideration and need to be very, very thought through. I think there is a midway where people needs to be very clear that the land value and the value of the facilities which are being given to the customer have to be clearly demarcated, so that even if you want to sell developed plots, it's better to have these two separate, where the sale of land is given clearly. Because treating the developed plot as construction of complex seems to be something which is which may not may not sail through in the court of law, is what my personal view would be. But nonetheless, the safer view would be to actually treat the sale of land as an isolated transaction, and construction of these facilities, maybe a works contract kind of an interpretation, depending upon the kind of facilities, is what people can think of. That way, at least you are not going too aggressive of not charging any GST on the complete amount, nor are you subjecting 2/3 value of as the taxable value for the supply. This is going to be an evolving topic. I'm not going to conclude which way is right unless and until there is a clear-cut High Court or a Supreme Court verdict or a CBEC circular coming in these aspects. But what I generally feel is that if at all you are supplying a developed plot, it is major, I would say 80 to 80% of the consideration generally is attributable to the sale of land. So it is obviously essential to register that as a separate transaction and give the facilities as a value addition, so that you actually determine the value separately. Now, how far that is feasible from a commercial or a business perspective or a strategic perspective is something which needs to be worked out with the legal experts. But the moment you club the entire thing and want to take either the provision of 2/3 value subjecting is a loss to customer, or treating as no GST is a loss to the developer, because the customer won't come and give additional GST if, say, for example, finally the department wants to tax on the development facilities. So I think we need to be very clear while at the stage of drafting these agreements or having these transactions executed, is always to see that we have only covered this sale value of land in a separate agreement. That is the best of the approach. And we have seen, as far as my experience goes, we have seen some of these developers adopting this practice. And then the documentation is also aligned to these kind of two separate transactions, so that if at all there is a department inquiry or there is a department investigation, everyone will have a clear documentary evidence to show that there is no way the value of land could be subject to GST. Now, this is an evolving topic, as I always say in the case of real estate. The kind of new transactions they come out with, we have to see how these courts are going to interpret in the coming years. But at least the way in which the CGST provisions are there, sale of land is something which can be argued to be said that there should not be a GST on that aspect of sale of land. Shetty sir, hope the speed is fine. And do you want me to give a break if somebody wants to ask a question, or how do you want me to take it?
Yeah, it is going fine. I think questions as of now, no questions I can see.
Okay.
So you can continue. I think there are there are 1 or 2 questions. Yeah, there are 3 questions. You want to answer now, or you can answer later also?
I'll just see, sir. Actually,
In
I'm
Q&A,
sharing the
there are
screen
3
also.
questions.
Yeah, I'm just seeing this. I'm unable to see the questions in the.
Sir, otherwise I'll just read out. You can.
Yeah, if you can, sir, please.
Yeah. The first question from Ganesh Bhatt. One of my client is landowner entered into JDA. There is no mention of GST in JDA. Whether now developer can collect the GST from landowner, or as there is no mention in GST in JDA, developer has to treat it as an inclusive GST and bear GST.
Sir, I will cover this JDA, one of these things which is there.
Yeah. Another question from Kiran Kumar. Please explain the applicability of RCM on joint construction of commercial property.
Okay, this is also JDA. I think many questions are there on the JDA. Okay.
Yeah, these are the two questions. So
And somebody was
one more in the
asking that.
chat box. What is the conclusion in case of developed land, whether chargeable or not?
So the conclusion which I was actually telling is, at least to the value of land, if we can identify and takes it, identify the separate agreement for sale and segregate it from the total construction value, we can take the position that on the sale value of land there is no GST, and on the development facilities only there is a GST. That is something which is a sensible approach, is what I would say, not subjecting the entire value to GST. Or taking 2/3 or 1/3 land deduction.
Yeah, that's all as of now. Please continue.
Right. Thank you.
If you want break, you can take break. Otherwise, you can continue.
No, sir. I can break and I can continue. Sorry, I can continue. I just thought, because I'm not seeing the chat window here, I just thought.
Yeah, it is on the right side corner.
No, because I'm sharing the screen. That is where the problem was actually. Yeah.
It's okay. Yeah, I'll read out the questions when it comes. So you please continue.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Now moving on further, I will answer some of these questions on the JDA while I have covered some of these transactions. If there is any specific discussion, we can continue as well. In fact, my next slide is on that. So taxability of TDR or FSI. So one thing which everybody wants to know whenever a real estate seminar like this happens, or whenever there is a discussion on GST specifically for real estate, is whether GST is applicable on transfer of development rights. Now, first and foremost, I want to bring notice to the audience is that specifically in Schedule 3, what is excluded is sale of land. So technically, if you are only giving if you are only giving, or if you are only transacting as a sale of land, then only there is no GST. Now, what exactly includes sale of land? Before I go into that, let me actually take one step back and see the definition under service tax. In service tax, when I was actually looking at a similar kind of an exclusion, what it actually has is that transfer of immovable property in any manner is what is excluded from the definition of service. Now, legally, if we have to argue, transfer, the word is very, very wide. That has been restricted to sale. Sale is one form of transfer, but transfer has other forms as well. So one way the government has restricted the word transfer to sale. Second, immovable property has been restricted to land. So it is not all immovable property. It is only land which is excluded. And third, in any manner, the third phrase of in any manner is no longer there in the GST legislation. So technically, transfer in any manner is a wider term which was invoked when the service tax legislation was prevalent. But when we moved to the GST regime, what happened was, technically this has been narrowed down. The moment once the definition or the exclusion has been narrowed down, what it means is that anything which is not a sale of land has to be subject to GST. Now, there is an interpretation which clarifies that the supply of land or sale of land includes benefits arising. Therefore, it could be contended that development rights are also part of the sale of land. So this is a wider interpretation. The development rights is nothing but land. So to those people who are arguing with me on these things, if development rights and land are almost one and the same, why are you not selling the land? The answer which came to me, no, I don't want to sell the land. I just want to give the development rights. So if you want to treat land and development rights as two different transactions, then why are you coming into an interpretation for the purpose of GST saying that both are one and the same? The answer says, no, you have to equate land. So if you want to treat both as one and the same, then you execute the sale deed. But there lies a thin difference between the two, that many landowners do not want to actually leave aside their sale rights or their ownership rights, but they want to be protected, considering the way in which these appreciation benefits are also taken if they actually go into a JDA. Very well taken. It's a practical approach from a landowner perspective, that he doesn't want to end the transaction on a particular day with a particular value, and he also wants to participate in the value accretion which happens because of the construction of project over the period of the development and also later. Now, if that is the case, the development rights is a different transaction. That is why I was telling it may. I'm using the word may. I'm not using the word as called. Development rights may be regarded as an immovable property. That is one agreement. There is this Chedda housing also, which is telling that it can be considered as immovable property. But as I have already explained to you, the indirect tax authorities have actually removed the phrase immovable property and replaced it with land. Very, very, very sensible approach if they want to get cut short the litigation process. So they are in their right to say that if you want to rely on this Chedda housing, this is one of the famous cases across India. People want to say that TDR is nothing but immovable property. Yes, TDR is nothing but immovable property, but I have not excluded immovable property from GST. I have excluded only land. Show me that TDR is nothing but land, to which the answer is yet to be given by any court of law. Now, technically, what is happening is TDR is therefore, at least with the way the legislation is worded today, TDR or FSI is therefore not equivalent to land, and therefore they may not be covered within the exclusion of sale of land as is covered in Schedule 3 as it stands today. And that is why the government is also very much clear that these transactions should be subjected to GST. And after considering these new regimes, in fact, on the representations where there is no credit available, because if there is no GST credit for the projects, why should the developer bear the GST on the TDR? They have come out with an innovative way saying that TDR or FSA for residential projects post 1/4/2019 is not subject to GST, but GST has to be paid under reverse charge only in case of residential projects to the extent of the unsold property which is there on the date of occupation certificate. That is what someone is asking. So on the date of occupation certificate, say 20% of the property is unsold or 20% of the flats are unsold, only to that extent the GST has to be paid under RCM by the developer. So at least they have given immunity to the landowner from registration and payment of taxes, and it is always incentive to the developer to sell the property before OC, and so long as he is able to do it, the cash flow effect is neutralized because there is no GST on the TDR portion. Now, one thing which is happening because of the TDR on the residential property, whether a similar treatment can be given for commercial, the answer is no, because everywhere they have used the word residential or the apartments for residential purposes, etc. So now one view which can be taken, whether this reverse charge is there for commercial, what happens in commercial? So in commercial also there are 2-3 interpretations. In fact, it's a big subject. Well, let me cut short and then I answer. The commercial projects are also, we need to see whether it is RERA registered or whether it is non-RERA registered. RERA registered is generally a commercial project which is the developer intends to sell the commercial apartments. Non-RERA is something which is generally intended for leasing out, like the normal malls and shopping complexes. So in those cases, typically what we need to see is that whether TDR has to be paid upfront or whether you can defer it. In some cases, depending upon the kind of project, there is a possibility to defer the GST till about the completion of the project. But there is an exposure of GST. There is no upfront exemption. That is one thing. And the aspect of reverse charge, which someone asked, is dependent upon what the commercial project is, whether it's a RERA or a non-RERA project, whether the GST has to be paid by the developer under RCM or by the landowner is dependent upon the kind of project. But intention is that there has to be GST on the TDR portion. There is no upfront exemption. That's what we can say. But specifics needs to be seen, because there may be mix and match of different kinds of commercial properties which are prevalent and which are being taken care, undertaken by the developers and the landowners across the industry. But if we go deep into it, the way we need to actually identify is residential, more or less the taxation structure or the TDR treatment is more or less settled, I would say. At least the government is clear on the way they want to treat it. But on the commercial side, when you are actually dealing with pure play commercial, there is still this GST on the TDR, and whether it is a RERA project or a non-RERA project, and whether you want to actually treat that as a RCM or whether under forward charge is a matter of concern. So if at all, if someone asks me, I think the best thing is first get the clarity under the RERA and make it very clear whether it's a RERA project. The second is, if it is a RERA project, then there is an element which we can try and see that the liability on the TDR is shifted to the the developer under RCM. But can it be completely exempt and it is only to unsold? The answer is no. The answer should be that tax has to be paid in full and taken as a credit against the construction service which the developer is giving. So considering the time which is available, this is something which I wanted to cover within this aspect of TDR. If I have answered one or two questions, and if there is any further discussion needed, please let me know. I could see those questions because one person was asking reverse charge. To me, the answer is basically dependent upon the this one, whether it's a RERA project or a non-RERA project. And if it is non-RERA, if the intention is not to sell the commercial apartments, then probably taking an argument of reverse charge is something which will be aggressive. I don't think that will fit in the way the language is there. Now moving on. Sir, you're on mute.
Yeah, please move on. There are questions in chat box. You have gone through that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that the earlier question.
Yeah, one minute, sir. I'm just going through that.
What is the conclusion in case of developed land, whether chargeable or not? In continuation of that, he said, it is from Rajgopal Tirumalai. In case of developed land, the rate chargeable is 18% or chargeable based on material used for developing the land. That is his question. Also clarify that, it's a continuation. Also clarify that if the developed land is sold without any collection of advance, can we consider as exempted sales since it is neither goods nor service, immovable property? Yeah. Please go ahead.
So one thing is that, sir, on the portion of land, I was telling that there is no tax. But on the development, we need to see whether it's a works contract. What is the kind of facilities you are giving? Depending upon the kind of facilities, whether it is a pure service or whether it's a works contract, like a composite supply, that is determined. If you are telling it's a pure service only, because technically he's not getting anything but enjoying the benefits of the developed facilities, you can be taken at 18%. because there is nothing like a chargeable material which the transfer of property is happening. Like to say that there is a works contract, it will be called as a pure service. Now, moving on to the next question, if developed land is sold without any collection of advance. Now, this all depends whether there is advance or not. What is the kind of agreement? So, if there is no separate transaction, the risk is there for God department rating it as 2/3, 1/3, whatever we discussed. But if there is separate agreement, then only to the extent of the service only there is a tax, whether you collect advance or not. You have on the portion of advance which is specific to that service, you need to pay tax. But if the advance is very clearly demarkatable and then you are able to show that it is towards sale of land, then there is no tax on that. Now I move on to the, I think those are the questions which are currently.
Yeah, one more question is that what is the status of GST on TDR in case of HD for plotted development?
TD for, say, the only exemption which is given is for residential apartments. So if there is a JDA which is specifically for only plotted land, to my mind, the exemption may or may not be there. May not be there is what I feel, because this is not a residential apartment per se. It is only a land which is given for the development purpose. On that you need to actually pay GST and then take the credit to the extent of when there is a GST, if at all there is you are charging. But otherwise on that transaction there is going to be a tax which could be come to it as a cost. That's what I would say. But specifics needs to be seen. But on a very high level, if you want to, if I have to answer, I can tell that plotted development JDAs cannot be equated as a residential apartment JDA, for which the exemption is given. So technically, the department may still say that since the joint development is not resulting in any residential apartments, then the point will be that how can the exemption be granted to that extent. So in those cases, the option is, rather than a joint development, a contracting model, like you appoint a third party only for the purpose of development. That is one thing which is being preferred rather than a joint development. And then once the consideration can be linked to the sale of land. It's not that the consideration has to be fixed in all the models, but you can still see if you want to get some consideration linked to the sale of land. That is an option which can be evaluated depending upon what RERA permits and how much you can take. But technically, if you want to do a JDA, or the TDR risk cannot be completely eliminated, is what I can say. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all. That's all as of now. Please continue.
Yeah, and one question on the commercial I have answered. Now I'm moving. So this is what I was actually planning to cover as regards to this extent of TDR. Now moving on further, there is this recent advanced rulings which have come on the aspect of maintenance funds or sinking funds, which are actually the amounts which are collected from the customers at the time of sale of flats. Now, generally the transaction, what happens in these cases is developer collects these amounts towards sinking fund and maintenance fund. Whether such amount which is collected towards the sinking or maintenance fund can be treated as consideration for towards taxable supply. Now, first and foremost, we need to understand there are two concepts. An advance for provision of service is always taxable, but a refundable deposit is something which is not taxable. So in certain cases, there is also a GST FAQs which were given by the CBEC at the time of introduction on the cooperative societies. They were actually telling in those cases that if it can be treated as an advance or service, then you may have to pay. Like, say, for example, in this case of Volatility Landmark Apartment Owners Association, what it has been, amounts that are not returnable would be treated as advances. Now, the moment you are actually treating it as an advance towards your maintenance, and that actually
Yeah,
get
hello,
in
Mr.
these
Ravi
kind
Kumar.
of-
We lost a couple of your minutes.
Oh, sorry, sir.
3-4 minutes. You are not connected.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So what I'm actually telling here is, am I audible now, sir?
Yeah.
So what I was actually telling is we need to understand the difference between an advance and a deposit. So what happens is if you're collecting any amount and the amount is towards the provision of service, then advances are taxable, and if it is identified as an amount collected for provision of service. But if there is nothing which is identifiable as towards an amount of amount collected for any service, then you can call it as a deposit, and there is no need to pay GST at the time of collection. So this is the fundamental principle, point number one. Now, what we were actually discussing is this sinking fund, maintenance fund, the corpus fund, all of these things which are there. Now, what will happen in case of what happened in two different cases? One in Olity Landmark Apartment Association, and the second one is Prestige South Ridge Apartment Owners. So, in these two cases, if you see, the first case, what this happened is amounts that are not returnable would be treated as advances. That was clearly laid out in the bylaws. Now, specifically the thing is that the bylaws have clearly provided that it is an advance towards service. Then there is no way you can escape, or you can defer the payment of tax till the actual supply, because advances for services are also taxable. That is the first advance. But in case of the Prestige Apartments, what happened is the amount collected towards corpus stroke sinking fund. This is what was the question asked. There is no, they do not represent any consideration. So it is collected as a contingency fund, the utilization of which is not known at the time of collection. So what they told is that at the time of collection, there is no GST, but as and when the deposit or the advance which is collected is attributed or used for the provision of service, then at the time you need to actually pay. So it all depends on how you are actually drafting the bylaws of the association or the sale agreement with the customers. So depending upon the same, the view will be changing, but it's a very important thing to note, because the sinking fund collection, the actual utilization may in some cases go up to 2-3 years. So why should we pay GST upfront? So that was the issue which is at hand. Now someone is asking that other question, like in case of whether that URD. So URD, if it is falling short of that 80%, only to the extent of that falling short, it is to the extent of what it's like. If it is 60-65, then what the 20 or extra 15% is what has to come under the RCM, not the entire 100. That's how you have to treat it. Now moving further. One more point on this TDR or FSI, which is there, which is very peculiar, which we have seen in one of the cases, is supply of TDR is covered only when the recipient is a promoter. But if there is an ambiguity, which is a person who is not a promoter, but that further person supplies TDR to promoter. So the in-between person who is buying that is not a promoter under the RERA. How will the situation change? That is one big issue. Like if you see this, A owning development rights is selling rights to B, but B himself does not develop. He is actually a trader in development right. Although I'm not too sure how frequently this happens in the industry, but one of our clients has come up with this issue where we were examining this. It further supplies right to see who develops. Now, the point what is happening is that reverse charge is notified only when the TDR or FSI is given to a promoter. Now, to that extent, the reverse charge notification or the exemption notification is not applicable in the first place of transaction between A to B, and also in B to B. In B to C also, Now what is happening is, if a view stands B, since B being the recipient, hence tax liability should be discharged under, and it may result in ITC blockage. Because what will happen is, B will not be allowed to take ITC with respect to TDR, because he is actually, the outward supply of TDR is covered under reverse charge. He will not be able to utilize. So technically, if somebody wants to trade in between on the development rights without getting the promoter tag, I think that there is going to be an issue if somebody wants to take that value accretion or wants to take some profit out of the development rate. That's not an advisable course of action as regards the GST proposition. This is what I just wanted to highlight as regards this specific transaction. Now, one more interesting point, probably this is one where I was actually involved when I was dealing with Safari Trades in some discussions. They were also talking to us when I was in eWay Mumbai. So I just wanted to take a few minutes and just explain what exactly is the issue at hand and where exactly we are currently in. The issue at hand is that procurement of goods or services or both for construction of immovable property on own account is ineligible. So if you are actually getting a building constructed for your own account, then you are not entitled to the ITC. But if you are actually getting the building constructed for further sale, you are entitled for input credit. So that is why when under construction residential properties are sold to customers before 2019 or the ongoing project, ITC is taken. That's the fundamental principle. But when I am actually developing a property where intention is to keep it for myself and want to earn a rental income, there is a restriction of not getting the credit. Now, what is happening is denial of the credit is leading to double taxation, firstly on the consumed portion and secondly on the rental. So I'm not getting the, technically I'm actually paying on the same amount because all these costs add up and then that is how the rentals are fixed. Now, what happened in case of Safari Retreats is, Safari Retreats has observed that ITC of GST paid on purchase of goods which are consumed and used in the construction of an immovable property should be allowed. Of course, the matter is pending before the Supreme Court for finality. But what they were actually telling is the phrase on own account means, in one of the sentences they told that the own account has to be seen as if at all I'm using it for my own office building or I'm only using it. But the moment I'm actually giving it on rent does not mean the building is on my own account. This is something which is a very fundamentally not supported by any previous rulings or previous interpretations. This is seem to be, if I can say, this is a radical view, but no jurisprudence is available to support this view. But if we actually go with that kind of an interpretation, what they are telling is the restriction of the input tax credit is not there so long as the item, the property or the immovable property is going to be rented, and the restriction should be there only if somebody wants to develop their own office. Say E&Y wants to get their own building constructed, and if I'm only constructing that building, the credit is disallowed to me. That is what own account means. But if when we actually did some more research, there are some CBC circulars which are there in case of BOT, road construction projects, where a similar phrase of on own account is used. They were referring that on own account means ownership has to be referred. So if I take the cue from that angle, what on own account means, even if the property is given on rent, that is still on my own account because I am not transferring the property to anybody. Now, this is definitely an issue because the entire commercial real estate is losing the bigger portion of the credit. But the way in which the language is there technically may not, this is what we feel, may not stand the test at the Supreme Court level. And I'm not too sure many developers are also taking this aggressive stand, although some have started intimating and then contesting, and even in Karnataka High Court there is one matter, if I'm not wrong, Bagmani developers, there is a matter which is pending before High Court. But Delhi, there are some High Court writ petitions which are there. But all of them are now eagerly waiting to see the decision of the Supreme Court in Safari retreats. If ITC is allowed, definitely it will lead to lower cost of construction, which can be leveraged to reduce rental. Obvious. This is because you are actually getting a huge chunk of credit which goes into the construction cost. Now, whether what is right or what is wrong, at least in my personal view, own account is something different because they have not used the word own use. The use word is not there. Remove on own account. So where a property is to be given for rental purpose, it is always on own account only. It is not for own use, because going into that interpretation what High Court has given in case of Safari seems a bit highly aggressive position. But with due respect to the judges there, I think the Safari raters was able to convince those judges and get that kind of interpretation right. But the department is not going to leave it at that stage, and that's why they have gone to the Supreme Court. But definitely a matter worth fighting. But if the people who are already there, who have actually been into these kind of activities, it's always better to start litigating this, because there are also time limits for taking credit which should not come in your way. Second is, if at all you want to take the credit, it is always better to intimate the department to take necessary precautions, because if you start using the credit, sometime you may even end up paying 24% interest, is what a huge exposure. So you have to weigh the consequences between what the High Court has observed and what a reasonable interpretation. But if you still want to protect your right, what some people are doing is take the credit but not utilizing it and waiting for the Supreme Court decision, so that at least you are not caught in the time limit issues. So this is something, a space which we need to watch out for in the coming days as regards the Supreme Court judgment. Just a minute. But definitely worth watching, and depending upon your client's risk appetite. I would always say that this is all linked to the risk appetite of the company, whether they want to take an aggressive stand of going ahead and utilizing the credit also, or they want to contest, or they want to fight it with a writ petition. All options are open, and one thing which is very clear is, in the whole of India, there is only one judgment. It is only one. There is neither a contrary nor a supporting view which is available, nor department has gone ahead and issued any clarification. So the matter is like live hanging on one High Court judgment of Orissa, which is currently available. So knowing fully well how the Supreme Court can react to this, and also the interpretation of own account versus own use, I think some more interpretational exercises need to be done before taking this, or suggesting this as a view to the clients. That's what a more prudent approach would be. This one of the issues, where although technically this is not a matter of concern or currently, because the many projects under the new projects where there is no credit at all. But what is happening is, even in case of ongoing projects where ITC is allowed, there are various inputs which are there, which are ranging from 5 to 28. Cement being subjected to 28% GST, whereas the GST rate is 18% and effective rate is 12%. So technically, you are actually coming into an inverted duty structure where rate of inputs is higher than the rate of output. Now, specific exclusion has been given that refund under the inverted duty structure is not available to construction of immovable property. So while this is not an area of interpretation, or it is not an area which is where you can take an aggressive position because the provisions are very clear. But as an industry, this is some point which needs to be considered as a representation or a point which needs to go to the GST Council to reconsider, because once these projects which are under the ongoing projects are going to end, then there will be a huge pile up of these refunds, which huge pile up of the credits, and suddenly on one fine day when you have to write off these credits because you are ending up in all new projects. I'm not too sure how many developers have actually taken that or done that exercise and factoring that much amount of reversal and one fine day. I think that's going to be a huge cash flow or a profitability affecting issue. It's actually better that some approach or some attempt has to be made to reconsider this refund. Although there directly there is no specific provision to challenge this in a court, because this is something which has been provided specifically in the notification. I just thought if you have clients, I think it's better to reconsider and whether they are ready to take that hit on one fine day when the entire old projects are going to be completed, or they're ready to reverse the entire credit, is something which each client needs to examine and then be ready. If not, and at least if there is an attempt to ask, it's better to advise these associations to consider this point with the GST Council, and if there is any chance of luck, they should try it now rather than waiting for the last minute. One more thing is whether Resident Welfare Association is liable to pay GST on entire members' contribution if it exceeds 7,500. So this was there earlier also when the members' contribution was exceeding 5,000. That was the earlier rule. Now it got extended to 7,500. So if members' contribution is more than 7,500, GST is applicable. This is how the words are. Now, what is the interpretation issue is what amount is taxable? The authorities are telling, like in Tamil Nadu Advanced Ruling Association, they are telling is once it crosses 7,500, say I'm collecting 7,600, you have to pay GST on the entire 7,600. However, Honorable Madras High Court in the case of Greenwood Owner Association said up to does not connote an upper limit. It is interchangeable with the term till, and that any amount till the ceiling of 7,500 would exempt. That means I have to pay GST only on the amount of 100 rupees. So in gated communities, especially in the south, where bigger gated communities still are under that 6,000, 7,000 range, there may not be issue. But once you cross this, probably for a higher areas, this is an area where you need to actually be very, very vigilant. Because of this, specifically, there is a High Court judgment on that, which seems to be reasonable as well. Now the question comes is that if up to 7,500 it is exempt, what happens to my input tax credit? Whether I will get full credit or whether I have to proportionately reverse as an exempted service, those aspects need to be worked out. But technically, from the member, if I'm actually taking an interpretation like this, still there is a chance of success, like the way the Madras High Court has given. And we need to see whether CBC and people will tweak their language, or whether they will go ahead with Madras High Court's interpretation is a matter where we need to see. But it's always better to take a prudent call, and where their amount is more than 7,500, there can be a benefit that can be taken the High Court judgment. Obviously, High Court judgments are more presidential value than advanced rulings, as you all know. So that's why I just thought this matter is something which we need to actually consider this. Now, moving further, this is one of the last of the topics which I just thought I will cover here. Now, at the time of flat construction, there are various recoveries which happen. Like BESCOM, I was talking from the electricity meter, installation charges, LPG charges. Like I was discussing just before this conference with Shetty sir as well, like the department always wants GST on everything, but we need to actually see that whether there is a element of interpretation, or there is an aspect like something is not attributable to the supply. So we need to see, like if you see that in this case, there is a view that GST is not applicable, as amount received towards electricity charges is entirely paid to BESCOM, and therefore GST is not applicable as a reimbursement of expense. So if you are actually collecting those electricity charges and merely paying it back to BESCOM, technically it should qualify as a GST reimbursement. But Maharashtra advanced ruling is there in case of E-square leaser, saying that GST is to be levied even on reimbursement of expenses from lessee by the lessor, even if such recoveries are made at actual value. Now, there is this concept of pure agent, which says that if there is any amount of reimbursement of expenses which are there, then expenses can be actually, the reimbursements are not subjected to GST only if the service provider acts as the pure agent of the customer. Now, this aspect of pure agent is a difficult proposition to justify in the form of documentation. But if you see that these BESCOM charges are electricity charges, why should it be routed through the developers' books is one aspect which need to be considered. But the moment the developer is involved, collecting it from the customer and then making the payment back, obviously we need to factor the risk of GST being there. Second is in the case of Karnataka, like in this Prestige Southridge, the electricity charges paid to BESCOM for power consumption towards common facilities. Even if there is a power consumption, this is actually from the maintenance charges, where there is a separate charge for the electricity charges, separately recovered from the members. That is also treated as consideration. Now you need to actually see the facts of each case. Obviously, that is how the transaction taxes or indirect taxes work. But the moment you are taxing something as subject or making a transaction subject to GST, for a transaction like electricity charges, this is always comes under the scrutiny. Why should I pay tax when supply of electricity per se is not subjected to tax? Now, what will happen is that there is an element of conditions under this pure agent which you are not fulfilling, specifically in case of common facility electricity charges. But why should I pay is always a question, and generally apartment associations have these difficult discussions with the apartment owners. But it's so long as you are not fulfilling the requirements of a pure agent, then technically you will be liable to pay GST. Now, the latest of these, one of the advanced ruling is in case of Masterly Calcutta facility, where they said that supply of cooking gas through pipeline is inextricably linked with facility and property management. So they are actually giving the cooking gas as part of the facility management. Now, whether this cooking gas supply is subject to GST independently or not, but they are telling that principal supply is facilities, but it is linked, where the amount is a composite supply. So they are treating it as a composite supply. So this also needs a tweaking in the agreement, or how to collect the charges for the LPG is something which needs to be worked out separately. So these are certain transactions which I thought are more relevant from the in the GST perspective, specifically in the area of real estate. And what I just thought is more appropriate for this audience is that your clients would be more coming with queries on more of these aspects. I hope this session has given you some indication as to the way in which you need to address the client queries, or at least given some guidance in terms of topical issues which are there in the real estate sector. I know that TDR and JDS are prevalent across this industry, and there are various views which are floating around on both on the timing of the GST and also whether GST has to be paid. I think many people have also asked on the chat box, but I would say that very, very clearly we need to advise the client about the risk of losing the case versus what exactly can be defended with a well-reasoned argument. I think that is something which we need to consider very, very clearly at the time of giving advice itself, because you can't actually go back and then fight the case, and once you lose, the amounts will be pretty high in each of these projects. So my advice is that please understand the quantum involved, and wherever possible, it is better to get that ring fencing done in the agreement itself, or if there is a view which is legally sustainable basis, some of these discussions, or even some of these expert lawyers or senior counsels, it's always better to take, if at all people are going ahead with no GST proposition on any of these transactions in the JDA. Residential JDAs are more or less clear, so I'm more inclined. This comment is more towards the commercial JDAs is what I would like to place emphasis on. And as long as these 5%, 1% without credits are there, now is the time, probably the September timeline has come to an end for 2021. But generally, what we need to also factor is the reversal of credit which we need to take because of an exempted supply, which is generally in case of real estate, what happens is if you supply the constructed flat post OC, you don't charge GST, and that becomes an exempted supply in the hands of developer. So to the extent of those sales, there needs to be a reversal of the input tax credit, and 2019 rules have made it very clear that proportionate area has to be considered for the purpose of common credit reversal. So that is one aspect. Probably I think we crossed the timeline for 2021, but for 21-22, if you are advising your clients, you need to actually consider this as a specific point for compliance and also for costing purposes, because the amount of reversals needs to be factored. And one more interesting point, probably which was required to be noted is, when you are actually charging 1% or 5% GST and you are not taking credit, the GST rate notification clearly gives gives an interpretation that so long as the rate is prescribed and credit is not allowed, that should be treated as exempted supplies. So what I wanted to tell to the audience here is, for those developers who are into new projects and old projects both, that 1%, 5% has to be treated as exempt, and if there is any common credits, like say for example the administrative cost or the head office costs which are there has to be a proportionate reduction considering this 1% or the 5% things as exempted supplies, because this is not directly flowing from any rate notification, but there is a specific clause in the rate notification which says that where a rate is prescribed with a condition that no credit is eligible, and the amount which is the amount of such supplies have to be considered as supplies to amounts related towards exempted supplies. This is something which generally is missed out at the time of calculating the proportionate common credit reversals, and I just thought it is better for me to explain that aspect to all these participants who are there. So with that, I think I would like to close my discussion, and happy to hear any questions if there are here from Shetty sir as well. Shetty sir.
Yes, you are done with Mr. Ravi Kumar?
Yes, sir. The presentation part I am through. Like I just thought, like please 10-15 aspects which I thought more topical.
Yeah, I think sir, foolish of this question. I think that one question I think not fully answered regarding that. What is the status of GST on TDR in case of JD for plotted development?
The plotted development, as I was telling, it cannot be equated with a residential apartment. So technically, taking a view that that TDR is exempt is an aggressive position is what I. So what I was actually telling in that case is that can we actually make it like a contract kind of stuff rather than a joint development? That is what one should explore, because technically the exemption for TDR is given in case of residential projects, and this plotted development cannot be equated as a residential project per se. Although the plot may be further used only for residential, but that it is always not the developer which is developing the property in terms of construction of building. That may be the owner who bought the developed plot, he is constructing on his own, because the building construction is not part of the plotted development contract. That's why taking a view that TDR is exempt may be subject to litigation, and it's better that the development is always treated as a separate contract. That's what I.
Yeah, one more question. The first one he reposted it. It is basically a contract one, not actually GST. One of my client is landowner entered into JDA. There is no mention of GST in JDA. Whether now developer can collect the GST from landowner, or as there is no mention in GST in JDA, developer has to treat it as inclusive of GST and bear the GST.
Sir, as far as indirect taxes are concerned, technically there are judgments which have gone up to High Court and Supreme Court that you can collect it from the customer. That's the fundamental nature of an indirect tax. Now, to go and argue that it is not something which is mentioned in the agreement, when agreements are silent, you can apply the basic principle that being an indirect tax, I am entitled to. But the way the agreements are worded, specific with specific clauses, if I have to treat it as inclusive, it has to be specifically provided in the agreement. So you have to view it as, since there is no provision, it has to be to the advantage of the supplier, saying that being an indirect tax, it is always assumed to be. Although I have to see all the other ancillary terms, and if there is any other contradictory provision, that may be difficult. But generally, the principle is that if agreement is silent and GST is being an indirect tax, the view has to be that it can be collected from the customer, so long as it is silent. You are not even telling it as exclusive, nor telling it as inclusive.
Yeah, well
but
answered.
obviously, like Shetty sir told, it's a legal question. I'm not a lawyer, I'm actually a chartered accountant, but having read these judgments in the area of indirect tax, I can say that these kind of rulings are available as long as it is a established indirect tax. The right to collect from the customer cannot be restricted, and therefore what we can say is that so long as the agreement is silent, the intention is always to collect.
Yes, Mr. Ravi, very well answered. So I think it satisfies the questioner. So I think we are done with all the questions. My one question is in case of plotted development or an apartment construction from own fund and own land, there is no joint venture or there is no advance receipt. In such cases, that still continues as a sale of immovable property. Once a post OC, if he is selling, that continues to be sale of immovable property. No GST attracts. Is that?
Yeah, no advance, so long as there is no advance.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Otherwise, I think we covered all and you have answered all the queries. Any questions you directly received? Sometimes
no, sir,
they
I
send
haven't.
direct. Okay. So otherwise, we are done with that. Thank you very much. We had a fabulous session. You answered all the queries and enlightened about the various issues, specifically on real estate, special transactions. As you initially said, almost all transaction of GST is special. So it is always a complex one. So each one think his own way, and even the department also wants to charge GST on every activities of the real estate. So that is one of the important area of revenue collection also for the government. That is the reason it is interesting. It is taking everyone's time and understanding of the law. It's a complex. Thank you very much for your
I have
time.
actually given my contact number to all the attendees as well. I have provided in the chat box. I hope that will be helpful. If somebody has a question, they can reach out to me.
Yeah, thank you. So, friends, I'll just once again reiterate in the initially I told about CABF. I request Bangalore branch created a CABF contribution link. CABF is Chartered Accountant Benevolence Fund. Lot of demand is there, financial distress because of COVID and various other reasons. So many members, our own brothers and sisters as Chartered Accountants, are finding it difficult to meet their requirement, particularly the family members. So I request all the members, we are really, many of us are blessed, so kindly contribute generously as much as possible. Life membership is just 10,000 rupees. Please contribute using bangaloreici.org website link. Please contribute. Individual ETG receipt you are going to receive it from the branch. So I request contribute generously for the CABF fund. So with that note, once again, request you to go through Bangalore ICA website for all our upcoming program. This Saturday, we have a very, very interesting program, and 26th and 27th, 2 days conference, 10th and 11th, National Conference on Indirect Taxes, and 1920 SARC conference. I request all of you to look into bangaloreici.org regularly and register, encourage us to do good programs for all of you. With that note, once again, thank you to the speaker, and over to Divya.
Thank you, Chairman. Dear members, I take this opportunity on behalf of Bangalore Branch to present a formal note of thanks for today's program. Our wholehearted thanks to Nanda Kumar sir. Thank you so much, Ravi Kumar sir, for spending your valuable time and giving an excellent presentation on behalf of all the participants and also on behalf of entire managing committee of Bangalore Branch, sir. Thank you so much once again.
It's my pleasure to be part of this.
Same here, sir. Dear members, thank you so much for all of you for your active participation. Request all of you to kindly look into our website for the further programs. Also, as Chairman sir requested, I also request once again all of you to kindly donate to the CABF fund. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you for all your patient listening. Nice to talk to you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. See you. Good night.
I'm late.